So let me dive straight into it, and I'll go across to NS Rajan. First, Dr. Rajan, where do you come out on this raging debate over moonlighting? Has Rishad Premji and Wipro, have they overreacted by firing employees, or do you think, given the fact that employees were caught moonlighting for direct competitors, what Wipro did is the right thing to do? It sets a precedent for everyone else to follow.
Thank you, Rahul. Moonlighting is no longer moonlighting. I think it's occupied space day and night. I'm neither for nor against. I'm actually on the side of prudence and moderation when it comes to moonlighting. There are multiple dimensions that we need to bear in mind before we take a position. So there is a nature of employment, there is a nature of role, there is a nature of the contract that you have between employer-employee, and the nature of stakeholders who are involved in the entire game.
Okay, so let's take it one by one. Let's start by what has happened most recently, which is Wipro firing 300 employees for moonlighting for competitors. Do you think that is absolutely the right thing and there is no two ways about it? Or do you think that even there, companies like Wipro and the others need to now take a more lenient view, given the fact that attitudes, especially amongst the younger generation, are clearly changing?
Honestly, I don't think we have evolved to a point where there is a concrete position that's been taken on moonlighting. So you have two divergent views. On one hand, you have employees saying it is my time, my choice, and my need. On the other hand, you have employers saying, listen, there is a code of conduct, there are employment conditions that clearly articulate what is expected of you, and there are issues concerning productivity, daylighting, access to information, breach of confidentiality. So there are issues on either side. But I think we need to find an effective balance as it stands.
Rituparna Chakrabarti, do you think that companies firing employees who've been caught moonlighting is absolutely the right thing to do? Or do HR departments really just need to dial back a little bit and get with the times?
I think, of course, I'm not probably privy with the actual employment contract, but from what I can hazard a guess on, the employment contracts signed by these employees are tight enough to kind of prevent them from work with competing organizations, working on very similar project or using competing skills essentially, and work with other organizations. Because that's the way most of the employment contracts, when you are on direct roles of organizations, are structured. Or even if you're not on direct roles, even if you're on fixed-term contracts, your terms of employment are such, the confidentiality terms are such that, and most importantly, the entitlements that you endure. Finally, your principal employer are essentially the ones who are taking care of all your entitlements under labor laws, your social security, your insurance, your accident insurance policy, and so on. So from that perspective, the employer does have the right over knowing and having access to that information in advance about what you're going to do, or if you're going to do similar work with some other organization. So from that perspective, if you were to look at it completely legally, I'm sure Wipro has done their homework before having taken that action. Just to stand alone, just to talk about moonlighting, it's a very prevalent concept in developed countries. However, the nature of contract and employment is very different. Essentially, moonlighting operates where an individual is trying to maximize his or her earnings by actually taking up 3 or 4 different kinds of assignments, but each one of them standalone are in the nature of gig work, by the way. These are not really where they have an established or a standalone employer-employee relationship with any of these organizations. And very clearly, all the 5 different potential organizations know it upfront and in advance that this employee is going to be working in different organizations in different job roles.
That's something completely different, and we'll come to that in a moment, where you have very clearly defined key performance indicators. The company knows the number of man hours you've signed up for and the work that you have to deliver and will be measured against. That's a different kind of arrangement. What we're talking about here, Prabhirja, is a situation where you're working for a marquee company like Wipro and you're working for a competitor on the side. Now, you've learned certain skills given your time at that organization. You're using those skills for a direct competitor. Do you then think that what Wipro did was right and there can be no argument about that before we come into the larger grey areas and how youngsters want to organize their time? So we'll come to that in a moment, but let's just deal with what happened at the moment.
So, Rahul, my own take is that any person who has signed on a certain employment contract is bound to comply with them. I suppose, since I do not have seen the employment contracts in this particular case, the contravention of full-time employment of time, effort, focus, let alone bigger so-called crimes of competitor intelligence share or maybe working for competitors, makes it fairly clear that Wipro did the right thing. But having said that, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot more of debate later, I think the concept of a shift from what I call corporate monogamy, where people worked for one company in fact all their lives, to corporate polygamy, where you worked with multiple companies through your career, to what is happening today, what I call, if I borrow again the sociological construct of corporate polyandry, where you are actually in a gig world working with multiple clients and customers at the same time. It all depends on how employer-employee relationships get redefined. Till the moment that that explanation is not clear to both sides, I presume one will have to go by what are extant contractual agreements that were signed off, and if in that case it was 100% time and focus, then I think Wipro was right. But I personally believe the winds of change are very obvious, and maybe as we discuss